All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Pfeiffer. This is Conversations on Retail, and we are very excited to have Bill Kirk from Weather Trends here with us this afternoon for a special event. He's going to be talking about kind of a recap of the second quarter and the third quarter year to date, and then a look ahead. And the great thing about these conversations, we call them Conversations on Retail, is because we want them to be interactive. And so to the extent that you've got questions that you want to ask Bill, go ahead and use the Q&A button within Zoom to submit those questions to me, and you can ask them anonymously. If you want them to be anonymous, just say anonymous, or I can share your name. Either way, doesn't matter. But this is an opportunity for you to ask questions. This is a presentation that Bill and his team would share with analysts from Wall Street and many others. It's just a great opportunity to learn at the feet of some folks that are paying really close attention to some interesting data sets. And so, Bill, if you would take a few minutes to introduce yourself and talk about weather trends, and then share what you have. We're so grateful for the time that you've invested this afternoon.
Sure, Matt, happy to help. Again, thank you very much. Again, so right now you're looking at our weather center here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. If it looks like a scene out of Star Trek, I'm the real Captain Kirk. So of course we'd have to have an office that kind of looks like Star Trek. So anytime you want to come visit us, we just moved in here to downtown Bethlehem. So it's again, real Captain Kirk here. And again, I can prove that. Back in the day, dating myself here, but back in the late 80s, I always say I knew this general before he was famous, Stormy Norman Schwarzkopf. And sometimes I hope maybe I say something here today that's profound and maybe gets folks to think differently, because he certainly got me to think differently some 32 years ago on a very short 10-minute walk. But again, the concept was we need longer term forecasting, but don't change your mind once you give me a forecast. You're the scientist, give me an answer, not a hedge. So one of the things you always hear from us with our clients is that we always give you an answer. We're going to tell you explicitly what the weather's going to do and explicitly what your sales will do if we've analyzed your point of sale. So again, maybe I say something here today that inspires you like he inspired me some 32 years ago. Slide here is, again, basically our outputs are, we'll talk about how we do it first, and then we're going to get into a recap of Q2, and for sure going to talk a lot about Q3 and even out toward Christmas. So hang on for the good stuff here, but I just thought it'd be important to have a little bit of a backdrop of what we do as a company. The core technology, again, from that inspiration was for me to dump everything I learned at Rutgers in physics and fluid dynamics and meteorology to statistics and cycles. If you're going to do long-term weather, you cannot use what we're using today. I'll admit it. Physics, computer models, they can't do it. Just simply can't be done. So you have to think differently. Think statistics and climate cycles, things that are longer-term evolving that can help you predict something in the future. In our case, we're predicting sensible metrics of temperature, rainfall, and snowfall by week, by mile, out 1 year. It's a rolling 11+ month forecast. So it's always out 1 year. Doesn't change once we issue it. And again, it's every mile on Earth. So we map it to stores and zip codes in 800,000 plus retail geographies. The outputs that you see here is not only a weather type output, cold, hot, wet, dry, upper chart, but also what your sales will do. If we have looked at your point of sale data, we actually project those sales after we correlate the past sales to past weather to then project those sales a year ahead everywhere you sell. Store, zip code, doesn't matter. Online, brick and mortar, we'll talk about that. For about 19 years now, we've been working with some, I say, the most successful companies in the world. And we're, again, pretty proud of these folks. Again, using a little company here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania to plan not just knowing what the weather is going to do, but more importantly, how much inventory do I need? Where do I need to put it to sell the most at the right weather? Some huge dichotomies across the country right now that, again, you're probably kind of like scratching your head. Why are my sales off? Why are my sales off? And a lot of times we can make some bad assumptions that it's COVID or it's this or that or some other thing. When in reality, it's just a consumer reacting to their environment, which is the weather. So a lot of big retail clients, a lot of supply side clients, a lot of Wall Street, several dozen Wall Street banks, really anyone that makes a seasonal product or has to sell a seasonal product, or Wall Street that actually wants to track your performance, months into the future. Those are the folks that we typically work with. Now, I'll get real quick through the meteorology lesson here pretty quickly, but again, so physics is just simply fluid dynamics. If you just had this one drop in the ocean or lake, that's easy physics. I can predict that cold front, that warm front, that's one storm, that's easy. The reality though, as you see in the bottom left of that chart, is that it's millions upon millions of interactions at the surface. And oh, by the way, up about 100,000 feet in the atmosphere. You have to predict all that chaos. That's what physics meteorology is all about. It's the reason your 5-day forecast is constantly changing, because there's constantly new data put into these models 2-4 times a day, right? So it's a moving target. It's not what we do. It doesn't work. So what does work? Statistics and cycles. So the top is just looking at, 126 years of statistical weather down to the day for 32 million spots on Earth. It's a ton of crazy math. After we do the statistics, and I'll give a couple of easy statistics here as we go along here that are just, why would you refute those odds? The other thing is just layering in things that you may have heard of, some 24 climate cycles, like El Nino, La Nina. We'll show an example because we are entering a very significantly important cycle among many others, but it is an important climate cycle, La Nina, and how it can play a role in the global weather pattern. Now, I'll use this top chart here. I say it's a trillion times a billion statistics, so it's a lot of crazy math, 61 factorial for the math guys in the room. But anytime you've had a 1 standard deviation of very hot March in the Northeast, what happens the next year? We go back and look at 126 years of that data, and you see, well, look what? There's about a 94% chance that the next year is very cold and snowy. 94% chance, right? So that's just one simple statistics. Now, that's done at a monthly level. We actually do these statistics at a daily level, roll them up the weeks and months and seasons a year out. So again, it's a ton of crazy math that would not be possible. Now, the one cycle we talked about here is La Nina. You can see on the chart right here is that kind of a double dip La Nina. We've been warning about this. La Nina is just simply a warming or cooling of the equatorial Pacific Ocean, right? So as the equatorial Pacific gets warm, you have an El Nino that brings totally different weather, to the U.S. and parts of the world. We are in the opposite. We're in a colder Pacific cycle in every front, really, both the North Pacific and the equatorial Pacific. The models on the right actually suggest that we're entering potentially a moderate to strong La Nina. Last year, we got into the weak phase of La Nina as we went into winter, and that created all kinds of chaos, right? We had an epic polar vortex that just pummeled Russia for months after months after month. They had one of the coldest winters in 8 years, and it was pretty epic there. We got a piece of that in February. This year's a little different. It's the second year of a cycle. And again, I always say cycles are different, right? So it's not just, it's La Nina. Everyone, academics and our government will tell you that that means the same thing every year. That's not true. This is a second year La Nina that waned, and now it's strengthening again. So this year is very different than last year. And that's why we believe there's going to be an early onset of the polar vortex in the US, North America, as opposed to Russia this year. So again, just some of the cycles we'd layer at the end. Now, obviously, if you're going to believe anything I have to say today, you better believe that it's validated, and we validate every single location on Earth that we forecast for the past 20 years. So we're really good at this. Statistics work. Again, we can't take all the credit, but the statistics, the math, and the cycles teamed up together actually work. So what you see in this chart here is the bar charts are our year ahead forecast. Now, I say this is the easy view because this is just the United States as a whole. We realize a lot of companies plan at this level, and that's fine. We're good at this level, and we'll show examples how we're good all the way down to a zip code, a city. So the bars are the year ahead forecast. Reds are hotter, blues are colder. The dotted line's actual. If the forecast was perfect, that dotted line would be on the tip of every bar. So again, we didn't fully capture the polar vortex in the US last February, but pretty close. Again, it was, for us, arguably a much bigger miss than normal, but still captured. That would be a good period for seasonal cold merchandise sales. Disruptive in some areas. Talked about the cooler trend here that we had this summer. Yes, the summer had some heat, but we'll talk about how it influenced sales, because you may see the headlines that it was supposedly one of the hottest summers in history, maybe not quite as hot as last year's hottest in history, yet why are my sales off for hot seasonal goods? We'll talk about that. So this was 81% in the US. I think it was about 89% in Europe. Again, so did very well capturing. This is just the rolling trends for the last year. Apologize for this little bit busy slide here. We'll just spend just a couple minutes here because it's important to understand. The chart left is just basically our short range 1 to 14 day physics-based forecast, right? So this is what we're forecasting for the next 14 days. This is using traditional meteorology, same thing IBM Weather Company uses, same thing AccuWeather uses. We all put our little slant on the models, right? We all tweak it. And what you see here is actually Weather Trends is pretty good in the 14-day forecast arena too. This is only spent maybe 10 years trying to get this forecast better because we weren't always the best, but we're getting very close to being at least in those top two consistently over the last 18 months. So that light blue line is our short range forecast error. Typically a day one forecast is going to have about 2.5 degree error, 2-3 degree error. That's just what you expect on day one. By the time you get out to day 10, day 14, you can be up in 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees, depending on the year with short range physics-based forecasting. It's just the nature of physics. The chart on the right is actually our year ahead forecast by day for some of the biggest cities in the world. What you see is that our error is typically in that 2, 3, 4, 5. A bad forecast was Chicago this year, in part because the polar vortex increased some error. We were good in saying it would be cold. It was epically cold, right? So 7-degree error, but again, that's comparable to a week 2 short range physics forecast. So again, typically we say our year ahead forecast will outperform a week 2 short range forecast. If you're comfortable with what you're hearing for 5 to 14 days from now, you'd be very comfortable with what we say because the error is actually less. So the next phase of what we do in our business is not only predict those sensible metrics of temperature, rainfall, and snowfall, do it well everywhere on Earth, but then to predict an outcome, right? So we need your point of sale data to do that. Now, in reality, we don't at this stage because we've looked at about 10,000 seasonal categories. The big retailers, big suppliers have given us their sales data over the last 20 years, and we are constantly updating it every single year. Everything you buy, shorts, sandals, t-shirts, coats, gloves, auto batteries, cold beverages, cereals, you name it, we've probably analyzed it, literally up to 10,000 seasonal items. So the goal is to correlate that sales data, your sales data by store by week, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, to past weather, but we have a slant in how we predict that. It's very different than just slapping up weather and sales doesn't work. So lots of proprietary ways that we look at that to get a really defined, strong model to then project those sales a year ahead. So the outputs you would see from this technology that does this in 30 seconds is the upper right here. We're telling you week by week, a year out in a very simplistic view. Now this technology generates thousands of data files that can feed your planning systems, feed your whatever, forecasting systems, however you would need the data. It's all API data type information. The outputs are typically this simple chart that reds are bad, sales down 20%, you know what that means, or greens, sales are up 80%, you know what that means year on year across any geography. So the tool will actually aggregate it to the country, to Walmart DCs, to Target warehouses, to Amazon, you name it, however you want to aggregate it in seconds. That's what the technology hopes to do. And the last piece here, and then we're going to get into the summary and the forecast, is that understanding where you sell product. It's very important, right? I mean, are you selling online? Well, that's a little different than if you're selling at the mall. And if you're selling at an off mall, that's a little different than the mall. Or you're selling at a, standalone big box retailer in the middle of a parking lot. I, as a consumer, am going to react differently if it's pouring rain at Christmas holiday shopping season or blizzards and snow. I am not going to go probably to an off mall out, where I got to walk outside in bad weather with the kids shopping. I might go to the mall. So understanding that typically, warm, dry weather is typically great year round for the Home Depots of the world, home centers, they can do things outside year round if it's warm and dry. Versus a mall, you need to convince me. If it's cold and rainy in the summertime, right, I might actually go to the mall, have dinner, watch a movie, do some shopping. So it's important, that last step, to understand where you're selling your product. Finally, the one of the critical pieces that clients love coming out of our technology is this thing called the power of 1 degree. What the technology will do is and it's a simple rule of thumb. Now, again, it varies by store, geography, but it also comes up with kind of a general rule of thumb for your client. Now, whether that's a Walmart or Walgreens or CVS or Home Depot, certainly could be some minor nuances, but this is what we've found out of thousands of items that we've looked at with real point of sale. So we'll talk about some of these, but we're talking about cold, obviously. Cold's good this time of year. Every degree colder, there's about a 1% increase in soup sales. If it's 10 degrees colder, 10% increase in soup sales year on year. Some things like heaters are very volatile, 10% for a portable heater. If it's 10 degrees hotter, you have 100% gain in portable heater sales. There's a downside, obviously. If it's 10 degrees hotter, then portable heater sales may be non-existent. And we'll talk about some examples here of how it is pretty much non-existent right now compared to what we were going through last year, because the weather this year versus last year's total dichotomy. So what we have here is just Q2 on a world scale. This is May, July. This is the National Retail Federation calendar of Q2. So here in the US, again, this is why summer was a little misleading. Yes, it was a hot summer, don't get me wrong. And in the West, it was record hot. And we'll talk about how there were some differences across the country. So you see in this chart here, map, Pacific Northwest, wildfires burning up in the Pac Northwest. They were the big hot spot, even hotter than California, all that red in the Pac Northwest. You see down in Texas, though, it was actually cooler than a year ago. This is a year-on-year map now. So Q2 this year versus last year. So Texas was actually had quite a cool summer relative to last year's, kind of record hot conditions. So this is important because, again, remember that power of 1. Air conditioners 1 degree hotter, there's about a 10+% increase in air conditioner sales. So Texas, even though it's hot, there may have been a decline in air conditioning sales because it just wasn't as hot as last year. Shows the trends across Europe and whatnot. Precip is right. So again, here in the US, we'd argue that the most favorable area was the Northwest, West Coast in terms of hot seasonal categories. North Central US was certainly pretty good. Hot, dry drought impacted the crops, but pretty good for seasonal. Texas, probably not good. Northeast, not particularly favorable in terms of year-on-year growth. Not saying you didn't sell maybe a lot of summer seasonal items, but did you sell as much as you did last year? And if you did in Texas or the Northeast, then you did something really well. You'd want to figure out how you kind of trump the weather, because odds are the weather had a negative downturn. And we saw that in the quarterly earnings reports from Home Depot and some of the big retailers, even the Wayfarers that did really well in COVID last year. They crushed it with 30-40% comp sales. This quarter, they did not. This year, they are not doing that. So something's happening, right? I mean, with the thing, part of it, a big part of it is the weather. So again, we'd say overall here in the US, we're about just a 10th of a degree cooler. But I want to caveat that. So if we look at the trend chart, apologize, you got to digest this here, and we can certainly send the deck to you later, or pause the video, I guess, when Matt does this. But so West Coast, hottest in history, right? That trend chart off the scale. So it was a couple degrees hotter than last year. East Coast, however, eastern third of the country, was the coldest in 4 years. So it's pretty much a big drag. Now, if you think about things that are seasonal, air conditioners, West, they've got their air conditioners. It's in the East where you either need it or you don't, and so it was really in the East where you probably may have saw the bigger downturns or less growth because of the much cooler 4 years conditions. So again, that's why you got to be careful. Just sometimes look at the big national picture. Yeah, nationally, we were just a hair cooler than last year's near record hot summer. You start to dissect this across the company, and Texas would be even worse than this chart here on the East Coast, much, much cooler. So that's why it's important to kind of look at those trends by your locations rather than just a national view. Now, part of this chart here is kind of the year to date. So part of its history, and then there's about four months going forward. Again, we go out a year, so we're already producing forecasts for August, September of 2022 are pretty much in the hands of our customers. And that's important because a lot of our clients are obviously like you, probably planning summer inventory levels, right? How much do you need next year? What do you need? Where do you need to put more or less? Not only in the US, but globally, and online, right? When do you advertise, promote? When are you planning big end cap displays? No point in telling me this weekend, right? This weekend last year was, epically cold, and folks might've bought a hoodie or a jacket. If this week I saw those ads, I'm not buying a hoodie when it's 85 degrees outside. It's a totally different year this year. So what this chart shows you is kind of the year-on-year trend. The bars is the year-over-year trend in the national temperature trends. The dotted line is less meaningful. It's just kind of the high temperature for the red line, and the blue line's the US low temperatures. The important thing that you see here is that we're plummeting toward winter, right? So we've had our hot weather, in terms of, the peak summer temperatures, and now we're obviously cooling off. The question is, how quickly are we cooling off? And more importantly, what you see there in that chart as of today, we've got 4+ weeks here in a row of much warmer temperatures across the US, and we'll show it exponentially warmer. So this is a drag. Remember, I said 1 degree colder, there's probably a 3, 4, 5% increase in fall apparel sales. But we're the opposite. On a national scale, we're 5 degrees hotter. So there's about a 15%, 25% decline in those apparel sales right now, because it's just so much hotter. And again, this is just the national view, which is taking into consideration some of the part of the country, the West, Northwest is actually cool right now. So again, it's worse, even worse if we're to dive into the US. We're very concerned about hurricanes. We'll talk about that in a minute here. So we have a very unfavorable Q3. We'll show a few of the details here of how it influences sales. We have a very strong Q4 though. We actually think if you can hang on. Now, unfortunately, what's going to happen here is that because we have such a prolonged warm September and then a pretty warm, maybe a blip of goodness in October, maybe around Columbus Day, but it's a blip. And then hotter trends for the latter part of October, especially late October. If you haven't made your numbers yet for Q3, this suggests that it's a train wreck. We're just not going to get there. We don't have the weather to make up the numbers at this stage. August, early September may have had some blips of goodness. These are tiny, tiny blips of colder, wetter weather that may have helped a little bit, So again, it's just important. At this point, what's going to happen, right? Retailers are going to mark down. They got to move inventory. Replenishment systems are overreacting. There's just too much inventory potentially. A lot of folks will make some bad decisions thinking that, oh, this is COVID. This is the Delta variant. This is that the consumer's changing, right? Or the reality is they're just facing beautiful, hot, dry weather, and they're at the beach, the lake, the barbecue, the picnic. They're not thinking about those things we don't need yet. I don't need to go get some heaters for my shed or my garage. I don't need to go get my battery's not failing in my car because of cold weather, right? I don't need to do those things yet. So I'm not going to do them yet. I'm not going to buy the product yet. Chart upper left is just the trends versus precipitation trends. We can do this again by day, by week. I never say use our daily year ahead forecast as I'm showing you here. but it helps. Let's look at some of these holiday trends, right? I know you're important about weekends and holidays. So again, Memorial Day was in a colder period. It just was much less favorable than the Memorial Day a year ago. Sales may have been soft. Father's Day may have been a bright spot right at the end of a pretty big, huge surge there. So Father's Day might have been your better holiday. Independence Day, again, a much colder, 5-degree colder thing. So grilling and things we might, shorts for dad, things that we would buy. I think men's apparel is about 3% per degree hotter, right? So dad shorts maybe were off 15%, in Independence Day. Just didn't have a lot of good favorable trends, even though nationally it was just a hair different than last year. Labor Day, not that great. Columbus Day, again, might be the lone bright spot here that we see in Q3. You see those big bars down of 5 degrees cooler. Now, what we need to do at this point, it may be too late. Obviously, these decisions with our customers are made 9 months, 10 months, 11 months in advance in terms of big promotional events. Columbus Day might be the one time where we can save a smidgen of the quarter. You're not going to save it entirely with the extreme conditions at this point. So steeper markdowns work. You got to give a consumer a reason to buy something they don't need. I don't need to go get a sweater right now. It's 86 degrees outside. But my wife might go get one, a hoodie, a jacket, something nice. If you showed me some massive discount, it's 40% off, 50% off. Like, whoa, wait a minute. I'm going to need it eventually, maybe. I might be enticed to go buy that if you got the fashion right and all the other stuff right. I might go get it if it's heavily price incentivized this early in the season, which is not the norm, right? Typically you want the markdowns less steep later in the season. Unfortunately, this year it's kind of flipped on its ear. So steep markdowns will work. The good news is, again, you can see the trends here as we get into Q4, November, December, January, very, very bullish signals, right? It's a very much more favorable. Again, speaking to that cycles, again, La Nina is just one of many, but the cycles here suggest that we might be polar vortexes, while they're natural, they happen every year. It's just a big spinning vortex at the North Pole that occasionally breaks into pieces like it did last year in February and invades the US. We just think those chunks of little pieces of the polar vortex have a better chance this year in December and for sure in January to invade the US. So we see a lot of good news. Now, the problem is you're going to be marking all this inventory down to make room for this later fall or winter merchandise. So there's going to be some logistical issues for sure that, now again, if our clients would actually try to proactively minimize this, how would you do that? Well, first off, you may not, if you're going to have the same amount of inventory for this fall weather items, you might have had a lighter weight mix. You might not be, you might be going heavier markdowns early in the season to move a lot of product at a lower margin. So lots of strategy you can at times try to trump the weather, but you can't do that obviously at this stage. So again, some good news here as we look for the Black Friday, Thanksgiving looks in a good period. Christmas looks like it's a great period. And then maybe too cold as we get into January, but it'll be a good clearance. So there's hope, you will definitely sell your seasonal merchandise. Slide 20 here, again, just showing you the power of one. And again, so we're going to focus in on here. This is this weekend, just to show you again, kind of maybe track this weekend. Let's see how your sales are doing this weekend. But this weekend's an epic change. Last year was the coldest in 29 years, this September period. So it was cold last year in September. So if last year's the coldest in 29, you sold a lot of seasonal goods potentially this weekend last year. This year, the hottest in 126 years. It's record heat. This is a big change. So 11 degrees on a national scale times our power of 1 degree rules. These are general rules now. Keep in mind, it varies by location. If you're grilling outdoor food categories, your cold beverages, your ice cream, allergies epic right now. Allergy asthma medication should be going through the roof. This is typically the peak of the ragweed season. So people like me that suffer from allergies and asthma, this is epic, right? I mean, this should be one of the best peaks you've had for that season and decades in theory. So up 11% for those categories. Now, unfortunately, everybody else that we really want to buy, jeans and coffee and flu medicines and boots and coats and auto batteries, even mouse traps, mice get cold in the harvest and they head inside your garage. Those are off 21 to 90%, for this weekend. So again, track it. Let's see how good this weekend is, year on year. So this is for I think the 18th, 19th as an example. That bigger period out toward Halloween, again, the October is not going to save us here, unfortunately. It might have, again, huge help last year, not this year. So again, this is the last week of Halloween here, showing 6 degrees hotter after 2 very good hot late October periods. I mean, we had some really cold weather in late October, much of October the last couple of years, and then this year is the worst in several years. So again, I think you're going to see, unfortunately, these negative trends continue. So again, more power of ones here of how simplistically you can take that information. So now let's look a little bit forward here. Q3 is August through October. Again, as you can see, again, quantifying it, the hottest in 4 years, second hottest in 36 years. This is not a good Q3. Precip trends, now wet is good. Now the west precip is misleading in this map here. The West doesn't typically get a lot of precip in August, September, October. They just don't get much. So maybe tenths of an inch. So even though they might be 200% over that, it's 2/10 of an inch, right? So it's not like there's a lot of precip. So sometimes when you have low volume, the map form could be misleading you here. So if there is a bright spot in Q3, we might say it's the West by a smidgen. Unfortunately, where we care about, eastern 2/3 of the country outside the Rocky Mountains, east, not great. So again, a very challenging environment. The other thing that's very challenging has already been found. We had warned of at least 20 named systems this year. Last year we had 30. That was a record-shattering 165-year event. This year we think that'd be 20. Reds highlight where we thought there'd be significant hurricane threat areas, hurricanes, not just tropical storms, but major landfalling events. We've had a bunch. We're already up to 14. We're going to have 2 more out there. The East Coast is the next target. Florida East Coast needs to be on guard because whether it's Odette or the next system here, there's one coming off Africa. This still has the potential to be catastrophic. And unfortunately, these are very disruptive to retail sales. Again, I think we've already had just, was it Ida that went through New Orleans? Ironically, Ida, when they hit Louisiana, it's I don't want to, God bless Louisiana. They've been hit so many times last year and again this year. Damage, but it's just not a big $1 billion, it might get up to 10 billion in damages, but this one, Ida, got up to estimates of 55 billion in damages. It's due in large part to the flooding in the Northeast, right? New York City just flooded underwater. Our area, was decimated by flooding. Philadelphia underwater, right? So that's where the billions, 55 billion in damages. We don't think we're out of the wood. We may have another $50 billion disaster here in Florida, the Southeast. We're not done here. So again, just something to be mindful of. Pre-positioning storm merchandise. Don't dump it yet. You're going to need it. So this is the world scale, Q3, August through October. These maps again show you the year-on-year change. And again, as we see across North America, not good. If there's a bright spot, it's Europe. Unfortunately, it's a little bit displaced more towards Central Eastern Europe, not as much in toward the Spain, the Frances, and the Germanys. Germany might be a little bit better for cold seasonal merchandise. So again, if we had to pick a winner, Europe versus US, I'd certainly say Europe. Russia, again, certainly off to a good start. Last year, they had a record hot fall. So cooler trends in Russia, and they are pretty cold, is a good sign for them if you're selling product up there. So again, just a visualization of how to look at the thing. And finally, everyone asks, we've had this chart. This map was produced a year ago for Christmas. We're not changing it. An interesting statistic, and I just throw it out there. It's just one of trillions upon billions that we would look at. But and obviously, that's all automated technology. We as humans couldn't assess all those statistics. Anytime you've had a cold May in the U.S., we had a pretty cold May in the U.S., you have a cold December, and it's a pretty highly correlated statistic. So whatever's causing that, the ocean cycles, the things that would cause a cold May are the same cycles that would cause a cold December. So again, it's just another thing that the statistics, the cycles, the La Niñas, things are lining up that we should actually have a pretty good Q4. So end here with just the winners and losers. Again, I don't need to talk about all these. We pretty much covered all these, but the good news is we are up at easy COVID comps to some extent. Last year we were coming out of the pandemic and people were going to the beaches and the lakes in the summertime. And, later in Q4, we had another secondary peak in November, December, late November, December timeframe. The good news is that we're up against those kind of easy comps, if you will, just in terms of people influenced by the pandemic. So lower consumer heating bills is another plus, right? We're not heating our homes. So consumers had to spend a lot of money last year. They're not spending as much money this year. So a lot of good news there. They'll have a little bit extra money. Now, that's a little bit. Ag, we're still very bullish on ag. Anybody in the ag world, if you have to sell food products have a lot of inflationary pressure, and it's going to get worse. We have epic droughts forecast continuing into Brazil for their second crops that they're producing. They got hammered this year with some of the worst conditions in 91 years. It's not over. So unfortunately, we see a lot of price pressures, and you're going to have to pass it on to consumers for sure for a lot of the food commodities. So the losers are unfortunately just a lot of things, right? I mean, we'd pantry load our house right now with hot cocoa, hot cereal, and hot beverages, right? We'd be typically starting to do those things in September, October. That's just what human nature is. Hey, let's get ready for winter. We're not doing that. So even those sales are off. So again, a lot of negatives here, unfortunately. Keep the faith. I think as we get into Q4, we'll have some brighter days ahead. So Matt, with that, I think, again, I'm probably right at 2:30 here, right at my 30 minutes. Happy to entertain some questions.
Yeah, outstanding presentation, great and incredibly actionable insights. I've been asking folks if they've got any questions, and none have come in. I think the one question I would ask you to wrap with, just out of respect for your time and everyone that's joined us, is if someone wants to have a conversation with someone from your team and dig into the details of their own business, what would be the very best way to engage the team?
I think, again, since I did the call, I'm happy to take the first call. So again, my contact information is here at the end, bkirk@wxtrends.com or bkirk@wt360.com, or my direct phone number's on here as well. So I can certainly get them to Jack, Rebecca, Billy. There's plenty of, folks that can help, dive deeper here. We certainly would want to do that. Bruce Firth is a good contact based there in Bentonville, your neck of the woods, Walmart headquarters. So he's a longtime Walmart exec. He's right there. He helps all our, we got dozens and dozens of Walmart suppliers there. So he's there. You can pop in your office if you want him to. So again, give me a call and I can certainly start to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, very good. Well, we will get this bundled up and pushed out to the entire audience. But thank you, Bill, so much for making the time to have this conversation with us today, present this information. And if anyone has an interest in getting to know Bill and the organization, the team better, I would encourage you to reach out to him. Just a great group of folks. So Bill, again, thank you so much. Hope you have a great day, everyone. And so long.